It's not just birds that lay eggs. Dinosaurs did too. And with so many dinosaur eggs found by paleontologists, you might think we'd have a pretty good idea of what they looked like. But actually, aside from the classic brown oval shape, we don't know much about them at all. That's because most dinosaur eggs were lost to time long ago, which means that everything we have is a bit of an egg hunt. Hi, it's me, and this is my channel. Dinosaur eggs have been known to science since the 1800s. But even though people discovered hundreds of them in the following decades, we didn't realize that those eggs came from dinosaurs at first. Instead, paleontologists thought they'd been laid by giant extinct reptiles called mosasaurs, which lived between 66 and 82 million years ago. Mosasaurs were around when the dinosaurs died out, but they weren't dinosaurs themselves. They were more like today's whales and dolphins. So why were their eggs so huge? Well, big animals need lots of nutrients before they hatch. Mosasaur eggs were definitely big, but they aren't the biggest ones we've ever found. And if these eggs were being laid by something bigger than a mosasaur, then the animal that laid them would need to be something bigger than any other animal that had ever lived. By the late 19th century, scientists had figured out that there were bigger animals than mosasaurs roaming the Earth millions of years ago. Those animals were dinosaurs. But even once scientists realized this, they still weren't sure exactly what kind of eggs dinosaurs laid. See, eggs are made up of two main parts, the shell and the albumen or egg white. And we have plenty of well-preserved dinosaur shells to look at. But over the years, the albumen inside them has mostly turned into something else, keratin. Keratin is the same thing human fingernails and the shells of turtles are made of. So fossilized bits of keratin are everywhere in the soil where dinosaurs once roamed. Unfortunately, it breaks down so easily that it almost never makes it into the fossil record. So basically all we have to go on are the shells, which raises a pretty big question. Even today, we can find birds' eggs in lots of different colors, ranging from the classic white of chicken eggs to the blue and green of a robin's nest. So what color were dinosaur eggs? Well, in 2017, researchers in China found a clutch of preserved dino eggs, some of which still had traces of pigment left over. The eggshell was a uniform pale green color. But wait, nature doesn't make green eggs. That's just a Dr. Seuss invention. So how did these dinosaur eggs get their greenish hue? Well, it turns out that pretty much anything that lays eggs has pigment in their eggshells. And in nature, that pigment is usually brown or blue-green. This is because eggshells need to be colored to hide from predators. Otherwise, birds that make white eggs have to sit on them for 3 weeks without getting eaten. The color comes from the hen's diet. Animals that eat lots of plants get a bluish-green shade, while animals who dine on bugs or small vertebrates often have brown eggs. So based on the color of their eggs, we can learn something about what ancient animals ate. But the cool thing is that sometimes animals modify the color of their eggs to match their surroundings. So to figure out what dinosaurs were eating, we also have to take their environment into account. For example, in 2006, researchers in Canada found some dinosaur eggs in rock that dated back to the Cretaceous period. Specifically, they were found in rock that was deposited in a lake. And that fact alone told us a lot about what the eggs must have looked like. You see, the older we get, the less pigment we have in our skin. And the same thing happens to dinosaurs. As they aged, the skin on their bodies became thinner and more transparent. So if they spent their whole lives laying around in the sun, their eggs would have had very little pigment and probably looked white or maybe even translucent. But if they spent most of their lives hidden away in nests underground, their eggs might have been darker. So we think the dinosaurs that laid these eggs likely spent time underground in burrows that they dug with their claws. And given that the eggs were found in lake sediment, we think these dinosaurs were probably aquatic or semi-aquatic. So we might have been able to tell that these eggs were laid by a type of herbivorous meat-eater called a mosasaur. But these fossils were found right alongside eggs that were obviously laid by flying reptiles called pterosaurs. Pterosaur eggs are small and smooth with no markings on them at all. Meanwhile, mosasaur eggs are a lot bigger and rougher. So these fossils helped researchers better understand the differences between the eggs of different kinds of dinosaurs. But not all dinosaur eggs look the same. In 2014, paleontologists in China described a clutch of eggs that were all roughly the size of basketballs. But instead of being smooth like a basketball, they were covered in bumps and ridges. These bumps are unusual because in the fossil record, most eggs are smooth. Even turtle eggs, which are among the toughest in the world, tend to be smooth. So it seems like the dinosaurs that laid these oddly shaped eggs were trying to hide them from something. And there's evidence that they were sitting on their eggs too, which makes sense because why would they want to hide something they spent so much time incubating? It could be that these eggs were laid by relatives of Ankylosaurus, which spent a lot of time hiding in burrows to avoid predators. Or it could be that they were laid by Oviraptorosaurs, large carnivores that preferred to dine on eggs rather than live prey. Basically, the shape of a dinosaur's eggs tells us a lot about what life was like for that species. And speaking of dinosaur eggs, there's one part of the process we haven't talked about yet. Making an egg isn't easy. It takes a lot of energy, time, and body mass. For example, birds spend hours looking for food to bring back to their nest. Meanwhile, dinosaurs required a lot of nutrition, so we can bet their eggs were big, which means they needed to spend lots of time hunting or gathering food before they could lay them. So studying the size of dinosaur eggs tells us a lot about the time and energy they spent getting ready to reproduce. When it comes to finding dinosaur eggs, we're really at the whim of Mother Nature. Most of them are so worn down that all we can see is their shape and size. And even if we're lucky enough to see a piece of their shell, we still can't tell what kind of dinosaur they belong to. So far, the only surefire way to identify dinosaur eggs is to find one that's still inside a dinosaur, which means there's still a lot we don't know about these mysterious objects. A lot of the time, we're relying on scientists in China to do the hard work of carefully cleaning and removing rock from fossilized eggs, which can take months. It's not exactly fast work, which is why we haven't found many of these treasures. Not to mention you can't just start digging up dinosaur eggs anywhere. There are laws against it, and that's part of the reason we don't know how common dinosaur eggs are. If they're rare, that means we got lucky every time we found one. But if they're super common, that means every dinosaur was laying an egg somewhere. And that brings up a lot of questions. Did dinosaurs gather together at specific spots to lay their eggs? Do they prefer to make their nests in the middle of nowhere? Were their eggs a popular snack around here? Sometimes we can tell what life was like for a dinosaur species based on their eggs, but we can't answer those questions until we find more of them. So the next time you're eating your breakfast, take a moment to appreciate the difference between a speckled chicken egg and a blue-green dinosaur egg, and then ask yourself, what does this tell us about what dinosaurs ate? And remember, sometimes you have to think outside the bird to figure out what dinos were up to. Thanks for watching.